Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty fundamental
Yeah, really core stuff.
about how we see ourselves, each other.
Yeah.
Specifically, this deep connection between how we talk, who holds the power, and how our ideas of gender and identity actually get formed.
Exactly. And we're diving into some, well, let's say, complex academic ideas.
Right.
But the aim is to get the key insights, the really important takeaways, without needing to wade through super dense theory.
Yeah, cutting to the chase. So our mission today, basically understand how language, the words we use, the conversations we have, and social structures, how they don't just describe gender and identity.
They actively create
They
it.
create them. And what's really fascinating, I think, is how challenging these norms, how messing with them can actually be a powerful form of pushback, resistance.
Definitely.
Okay, so where do we start? Let's unpack this.
Let's start with that core idea. Language isn't neutral. The way we speak, what academics sometimes call discourse, it's deeply tied up with power structures in society.
Yeah. Okay, so it's not just the words themselves, but the whole system of how we talk about things. And this is shaped by what's seen as normal.
Precisely. The dominant social norms. They heavily influence how we categorize and discuss gender and identity. And then that language, in turn, kind of reinforces those very norms.
Often without us even realizing it, I guess.
Exactly. It becomes the water we swim in.
Can you give us a quick example just to make it really concrete?
Sure. Think about how often we talk about gender as strictly man or woman. Just those two options.
The binary, yeah.
Right. Now, that seems straightforward. But that binary system inherently marginalizes anyone who doesn't fit neatly into one of those two boxes.
Push them aside.
Yeah. The source material actually points out that for any category, like man or woman, to seem stable and solid, it often relies on excluding other possibilities, defining itself by what it isn't.
Got it. So the structure itself creates exclusion. Okay, so if language shapes it, how do we actually become a certain gender or identity? It's obviously more complex than just biology.
Oh, absolutely. Biology is part of the picture, sure. But gender and identity, they're actively constructed, built, you could say, through social practices, through
Right.
discourse. They aren't just things you're born with.
Right, not just innate. And this connects to something in our notes, regulatory practices. What does that mean exactly? Sounds a bit formal.
It does sound a bit academic, but think of them as the often unspoken rules, the social cues and expectations that tell us how we're supposed to understand and, importantly, do gender.
Like how boys should act versus how girls should act.
Exactly that. From how we dress to how we move to the roles we're kind of pushed towards. These are regulatory practices in action.
An invisible rule book, almost.
Kind of, yeah. And this ties into another concept, compulsory heterosexuality.
Okay.
The idea here is that society often exerts pressure, sometimes subtle, sometimes not, pushing people towards specific gender roles that align with heterosexual relationships.
So it reinforces the man-woman binary again.
Precisely. It makes that seem like the default, the only natural way, which marginalizes other ways of being, other forms of desire. The source really emphasizes how these regulatory norms aim to stabilize gender, specifically to support this heterosexual framework.
It's like society has a preferred script, and we're all encouraged to stick to it. What about our internal feelings, though? Surely those are just ours.
That's a really interesting point.
Ah.
But even those feelings we consider deeply personal,
Yeah.
our sense of self, they're often shaped by the social categories and the language available to us.
Oh, so?
We understand ourselves, we make sense of our feelings using the concepts and scripts we learn from the society around us. The available vocabulary shapes the internal experience, in a way.
Oh, okay. That leads us to challenging these norms. You mentioned gender trouble earlier as resistance. It sounds disruptive, like you said. Is it about personal confusion?
That's a common misconception. But no, in this context, gender trouble isn't about someone being personally distressed or confused about their gender.
Yeah.
Instead, it's about deliberately disrupting, intentionally messing with those established, often rigid gender norms we've been talking about.
Ah, I see. So it's an active choice, a kind of social commentary or action.
Exactly. By challenging the norms, by performing gender wrongly, according to the rules, you highlight that gender isn't this fixed, natural thing.
You show it's constructed.
Right. And that act of disruption can then start to, chip away at the dominant power structures that rely on those rigid categories staying in place.
Okay, that makes more sense. Can you give us some examples? What does this resistance look like in practice?
Well, one clear example is individuals who consciously perform or express their gender in ways that defy expectations.
Like someone mixing styles typically seen as masculine or feminine?
Precisely. Someone whose presentation blurs those lines, plays with them. The source material actually talks about how this kind of parody, it can expose the imitative nature of gender itself.
Imitative nature.
Yeah, like it shows that gender is often about copying perceived norms. And maybe there isn't even a true original gender expression to copy in the first place. It's all performance, all imitation.
Interesting. So playing with gender norms reveals them as performances. What's another form of gender trouble?
Another really powerful one is creating and using new language, new terms to describe gender identities and experiences that exist beyond the simple binary.
Like non-binary terms or more specific identities.
Exactly. When we develop and use language that actually reflects the diversity of human experience, we challenge the limits of the old language. We make space, linguistically and socially.
Making the invisible visible because now there's a word for it. Okay. Now, you also mentioned something important, that gender trouble isn't always about finding a new, stable identity.
Yes, that's a crucial distinction. The goal isn't necessarily to swap one set of fixed boxes for another slightly different set.
So what is the goal then?
Often, it's more about destabilizing the idea of fixed categories altogether. It's about highlighting the fluidity, the contingency, the constructedness of identity itself.
Okay, embracing the instability. This feels like a good point to bring in the body. We usually think of our bodies as, well, biological facts. But there's more to it in this view.
Yes, definitely. Instead of seeing the body as just this passive biological thing that gender gets layered onto, this perspective argues the body is actively constituted.
Constituted, meaning shaped, formed.
Exactly. Formed and shaped through social practices, through discourse, through those regulatory norms we talked about. Society actively produces the kind of bodies it recognizes.
So norms about gender get, like, written onto the body. How does that happen?
Through repetition.
Yeah.
Through the repeated actions, gestures, postures, and societal expectations associated with different genders. Think about how we learn to hold ourselves, how we dress, the ways we're expected to move or take up space.
All those subtle things we do constantly.
Right. And they build up over time to make the body appear naturally gendered in a certain way.
So the body becomes the surface where society inscribes gendered meaning. Can we think of more examples?
Dress codes are a really obvious one, right?
Yeah.
Certain clothes are heavily coded masculine or feminine,
Sure.
but also expectations about behavior, how emotional someone should be, how assertive, how much physical space they occupy. These are all linked to gender and read onto bodies.
And bodies that don't conform.
They often face social consequences, marginalization, being seen as wrong or unnatural. The source discusses how these social schemas, these rules, effectively define what's normal by excluding or punishing whatever doesn't fit. It draws the boundaries.
That idea of pushing out or expelling really shows the power involved.
Well-
Okay, let's connect this to performativity again. Our prep mentioned it's not just a conscious choice, like acting.
That's a really key nuance, yeah. Performativity in this specific theoretical sense isn't like putting on a play. It's not necessarily a conscious, deliberate choice moment by moment.
So what is it then?
It's more about the ongoing, often unconscious repetition of those social norms. The daily enacting of gendered behaviors. It's this constant reiteration that produces the effect, the illusion, of a stable internal gender identity.
So it's less about who you fundamentally are inside.
And more about what you do, socially, repeatedly, how you enact and embody these norms day in, day out. That's what constitutes gender in this view.
We sort of become our gender through doing it, even if we don't consciously think about it that way.
In a sense, yes. And the source also points out something critical. Our understanding of gender identity itself is often filtered through a heterosexual lens.
What does that mean in practice? How does that filtering work?
It means many of the available social scripts, the categories we use, the stories we tell about gender,
Yeah,
they implicitly or explicitly assume or center heterosexuality.
making it the default.
Right. And this can make it difficult to articulate or even recognize identities and desires that fall outside that framework. They get marginalized, seen as other, or exceptions to the rule.
Okay, that connects back to the power structures we started with. And finally, there was a point about resistance. That focusing on the instability of identity can be powerful.
Yes. Instead of trying to find the true fixed identity category, recognizing that identities including gender are fluid, constructed, and changeable. That itself can be a challenge to systems that rely on rigid categorization.
So embracing the uncertainty is a form of resistance.
It can be, yes. It challenges the very foundation of those controlling norms.
Wow. Okay, this has been a lot to think about, but really insightful. So just to sum up the main threads,
Go for it.
we've seen how language and power aren't separate from gender and identity. They actively shape them. We've talked about gender trouble not as a problem, but as a potentially powerful way to disrupt dominant norms by playing with expectations.
Right, exposing the constructed nature of it all.
And we've looked at the body not just as biology, but as something actively shaped, constituted by social forces and performative acts.
Absolutely. And understanding these dynamics, it gives you a critical lens, doesn't it? A way to see how these social categories actually operate and potentially how change might happen.
It really helps make sense of things you see every day once you have this framework.
Yeah, it illuminates the forces shading our own experiences and how we perceive others.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to take away. Reflect on this. How might the everyday language you use, the norms you encounter, or even participate in, be subtly shaping your own understanding of gender and others' understanding too?
That's a great question.
And maybe think about how seemingly small acts, small moments of questioning or challenging those norms, how they might actually contribute to bigger shifts in how we all understand and accept each other down the line.
Definitely some food for thought there.
Indeed. Thanks for diving deep with us today.